Have you ever walked into a room and felt a sudden inexplicable cold? A feeling that the air itself is heavy with the weight of things long past? Most people just dismiss it. A draft, a trick of the mind. I couldn't. My name is Elara Vance, and I'm a historian. My specialty is the esoteric, the forgotten figures who exist only as footnotes in dusty old books. I thought I was being given the opportunity of a lifetime to document the life of a century-old recluse in his decaying Gothic manor. I didn't realize the house itself had its own history, and it was hungry. This isn't a story I've told many people. It's not the kind of thing you expect to be believed, but it's true. And it all started with a letter, penned in an elegant, spidery script inviting me to Blackwood Manor. The manor wasn't just in the middle of nowhere. It felt like the nowhere that other nowheres warn you about. The nearest town was a good hour's drive away, a sullen little place that seemed to huddle in on itself. When I asked for directions to Blackwood Manor, the locals would just nod slowly, their eyes filled with a kind of weary pity. The drive itself was the beginning of the horror, though I didn't know it then. The road dissolved from cracked asphalt into a muddy, rutted track, swallowed on either side by a forest of skeletal, claw-like trees that blotted out the sun. When I finally saw it, Blackwood Manor didn't so much stand as it did slouch against a bruised purple sky. It was a chaotic jumble of sharp spires, leering gargoyles, and windows like vacant eyes. It looked less like a building, and more like a dying beast, its stone skin crumbling, its rooftop sagging like a broken spine. A cold, damp air just clung to the place, a permanent chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It felt ancient and malevolent, a place where happiness came to die and was buried in an unmarked grave. The man who answered the door was Mr. Alistair Blackwood himself. The legend said he was over 100 years old, and I could believe it. He was impossibly thin, like a scarecrow draped in fine, if dated, silks. His skin was like parchment stretched taut over a delicate skull, but his eyes were sharp and shockingly vibrant, two chips of obsidian that seemed to burn with a cold, ancient light. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was unsettling in a man so obviously frail. His voice was a dry rustle, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. He welcomed me, showed me to my rooms, and laid out my task: to organize and catalog his immense, labyrinthine library. He gave me only one rule. The north wing, specifically the tower that led to the attic, was strictly forbidden. There are some histories, he whispered, his lips barely moving, that are best left unread. My first few days were a historian's dream. The library was a treasure trove of forgotten knowledge, filled with first editions and handwritten manuscripts that would make any academic weep. But the house itself, it began to work on me. It was never truly silent. There were these constant, subtle sounds right at the edge of your hearing. A faint whisper that sounded like my name, the soft swish of fabric in an empty hallway, the creak of a floorboard from the room right above me when I knew for a fact Mr. Blackwood was in the east wing. The chill I'd felt outside was a permanent resident within the walls. Pockets of intense cold would just drift through rooms, raising the hair on my arms and leaving me shivering. I'd be sitting at a desk, deep in some 16th century text, and suddenly feel like I was being watched. A palpable pressure on the back of my neck. When I'd turn, of course, there was nothing there. Just long, distorted shadows and dust motes dancing in the slivers of weak light. My work became my only refuge, but even there I found disquiet. Tucked inside an old folio, I found a slim, leather-bound journal. It was written by a young woman named Isabelle, an artist's apprentice who'd come to the manor about 50 years earlier to study with a much senior patron of the arts. Her first entries were full of wonder about the house and its strange owner, but her tone slowly started to change. She wrote of a pervasive sadness, of feeling constantly tired, drained. She complained about the cold, the oppressive silence, and that feeling of being watched. Her handwriting grew frantic, shaky. Her last entry was a single, terrifying sentence. "I see my face in the corner of the canvas now. It is so pale." The pages after were blank. I tried to dismiss it as a flight of fancy, but a few days later, tucked into a different volume, I found a series of letters from a young poet named Thomas from the 1920s. He too had been invited to the manor to work on his craft under Mr. Blackwood's patronage. He too wrote of the strange, draining atmosphere. He mentioned a portrait in the attic, one Mr. Blackwood was intensely proud of, but which gave him a profound sense of unease. He described a creeping exhaustion, a creative and vital low he couldn't shake. His last letter ended mid-sentence. The eyes in the painting, they never... After that, nothing. I'd read stories like this before. It's another thing entirely to live one. I was no longer just a historian. I was an investigator, and a deeply frightened one at that. My academic interest in Alistair Blackwood was quickly being replaced by a primal fear of him. He was like a phantom in his own home. I'd go days without seeing him, only to have him materialize silently at my shoulder, his presence announced only by the sudden drop in temperature. He ate almost nothing, just a little broth and weak tea, yet he never seemed to get weaker. If anything, as the weeks wore on, he seemed to have a renewed vigor. The shuffle in his step lessened, and the vibrant light in his eyes seemed to burn a little brighter. It was as if the house itself were sustaining him, or maybe something else was. My mind kept returning to the journals, to Isabelle and Thomas, two creative, vibrant young people invited here decades apart who both complained of being drained right before they vanished. And then there was the one common thread, the forbidden attic and the mention of a portrait. My historian's training, the very thing that brought me here, was screaming at me to find the truth. The burden of the past felt like a physical weight in that house, and I was convinced the answers were at the top of that north tower. One evening I was putting a heavy book back on a high shelf in the library when my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic wedged behind the other books. It was a key. An old, ornate iron key, heavy and dark with age. It didn't match any of the doors in the main part of the house. I'd already tried them all in a fit of nervous energy. But it looked like it belonged to a much older lock, the kind you might find in a disused, forgotten part of a sprawling manor. The kind of lock that might be on the door to the North Tower attic. I stood there for a long time, the cold metal of the key seeming to suck the warmth right out of my hand. Every instinct for self-preservation told me to leave it, to pack my bags and run from Blackwood Manor without a backward glance. But I kept seeing the faces of Isabelle and Thomas, imagined from their words. The historian in me, the part that craves answers and seeks to give a voice to the silenced past, was stronger than my fear. Holding the key in a white-knuckled grip, I waited until the dead of night, until the house was settled into its deepest silence, and I made my way towards the north wing. The door to the North Tower staircase was at the end of a long, cold corridor I had actively avoided. The air grew colder with every single step, and a thick, cloying smell of dust and decay filled my lungs. The iron key slid into the lock with a well-oiled click that was shockingly loud in the silence. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow, spiraling staircase that climbed up into absolute darkness. I only had my phone's flashlight, and its thin beam seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive black just a few feet ahead. The climb was a nightmare. The wooden steps groaned and sagged under my weight. Cobwebs as thick as cotton brushed against my face. The air grew progressively colder, and I could see my breath pluming in the weak light. It felt like I was climbing into a crypt. There was a palpable sense of wrongness, that I was violating a sacred space. And with every step, I felt that draining sensation Isabelle and Thomas had described, a leaden weariness settling deep into my bones. Finally, I reached the top, a small landing in front of a heavy oak door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into the attic. The room was vast, much larger than I'd expected, the ceiling lost in the darkness above. It was a graveyard of forgotten things, with furniture draped in white sheets like rows of tombstones. Dust lay so thick on everything it looked like a layer of gray snow. My light cut through the gloom, landing on the center of the room. There, on a heavy easel, was a single massive object, also covered by a large stained sheet. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew with a certainty that made no sense. This was it. This was what I had come for. My hands were trembling as I reached out and took a corner of the sheet. I pulled. The fabric, heavy with the dust of decades, slid to the floor with a soft, dead sound, and I was staring into the face of evil. It was a portrait. A full-length portrait of a stunningly handsome young man in his early 20s, dressed in Edwardian finery. His hair was dark, his jawline sharp, and his eyes were the same burning obsidian chips as Alistair Blackwood's. It was him, captured in his prime. But the painting was unlike anything I had ever seen. The artist had used a technique that made the canvas seem to pulsate with a life of its own. The young Blackwood's expression was one of cruel, arrogant beauty. It was mesmerizing, and it was alive. I swear, the eyes followed me as I moved. Then, a detail at the edge of the frame caught my eye. Faintly, almost like ghostly after-images, were other faces, 2 of them. One was a woman with large, terrified eyes. The other was a young man, his mouth open in a silent scream. They were rendered in pale, washed-out tones, as if their life force had been bled from them to give the central figure his vibrancy. I knew with a gut-wrenching certainty I was looking at Isabelle and Thomas. And as I stared, horrified, a new space on the canvas began to shimmer. The faint ghostly outline of my own face began to appear in the darkness. A wave of dizziness hit me. The unnatural cold in the attic intensified, sinking into my bones like icy needles. It wasn't just cold. It was an absence of heat, an absence of life. I felt this horrifying pulling sensation, as if a thread were being tugged from the very center of my being, drawing my energy, my warmth, myself toward the canvas. My face in the painting was becoming clearer, my features rendered in the same pale, translucent tones as the others. The handsome man in the portrait seemed to smirk, his painted lips curling in triumph. "It is a masterpiece, is it not?" The voice came from right behind me. It was no longer the dry, papery rustle of an old man. It was smooth, rich, and full of terrifying vitality. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Alistair Blackwood stood in the doorway. But it was not the decrepit old man I'd met weeks ago. He stood straighter, taller. The wrinkles on his face seemed shallower, the parchment skin now holding a faint, healthy color. He looked 50 years younger, his obsidian eyes glowing with a triumphant evil power. "I was so hoping you would be curious, Elara," he said, taking a step into the room. "Curiosity is such a vital, potent emotion. It feeds the canvas so beautifully." My mind was reeling. What is this?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. He gestured towards the painting with a theatrical flourish. "A solution, my dear historian. A solution to the dreary finality of death. You see, the portrait and I, we have an arrangement. It grants me life, sustained and prolonged, but it has an appetite. It requires inspiration." He smiled, a chillingly predatory expression. "It requires a fresh face, a vibrant soul to infuse it with new energy. Every few decades it begins to fade, and I grow weak. So I find a promising young artist, a poet, a historian, someone with a fire inside them. I invite them here, and they become a part of the masterwork." Horror washed over me in a sickening wave. Isabelle, Thomas. They weren't just gone, they were consumed, imprisoned in the canvas to fuel this monster's unnatural life. "You're a parasite," I breathed, a mix of terror and revulsion curdling in my stomach. "A connoisseur," he corrected smoothly, "and the piece is almost complete. My last feeding sustained me for a very long time, and the canvas has grown powerful. It now requires only one final muse to anchor my vitality for another century. And you, my dear, with all your passion for the past, will burn so very brightly." He took another step closer. The pulling sensation intensified, and I felt my knees buckle. My vision began to blur at the edges. On the canvas, my spectral face was now terrifyingly clear, my painted eyes wide with the same horror that was consuming me now. I was being unwritten from the world and painted into his personal hell. A primal surge of adrenaline cut through the terror. I was not going to become another faded ghost on a cursed canvas. I was not going to be a footnote in Alistair Blackwood's monstrous history. As he lunged for me, his youthful grace a horrifying parody, I reacted on pure instinct. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a dusty bronze statuette from a nearby table, and threw it, not at him, but at the portrait. The statuette struck the canvas with a sickening thud. A terrible shrieking sound, like tearing silk and human agony combined, erupted from the painting. Blackwood screamed in unison, stumbling back as if he'd been physically struck. A long, dark crack appeared across the painted face of the young man, and from it, a thick, black, tar-like substance began to ooze. The painting was bleeding. The effect on Blackwood was instantaneous and horrific. The vitality drained from him in a visible wave. His skin began to sag, the healthy color vanishing, replaced by a deathly gray pallor. The years he had stolen came rushing back all at once. He aged a century in a matter of seconds, his body collapsing in on itself. He fell to his knees, his hands clawing at his now ancient withered throat, his breath coming in ragged, choking gasps. The house itself seemed to react. A low groan shuddered through the entire structure. The air, once supernaturally cold, was now filled with a chaos of spectral whispers. The voices of Isabelle, Thomas, and countless others, a chorus of released agony and rage. The pulling sensation was gone, replaced by a feeling of explosive energy being unleashed. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I scrambled past the shriveling form of Blackwood and fled. I half ran, half fell down the winding attic stairs, the whispers of the dead chasing me. Doors slammed open and shut in the corridors around me as the entire manor seemed to be tearing itself apart. I didn't stop, didn't look back, not even when I heard a final, drawn-out shriek from the north tower, a sound that was abruptly cut off by the crash of splintering wood and shattering stone. I burst out the front door into the pre-dawn gloom, my lungs burning, my mind fractured. I threw myself into my car and sped away, leaving Blackwood Manor to its final violent death throes in my rearview mirror. I drove until the sun was high in the sky, until the skeletal forest gave way to open fields, and I didn't stop until I had put 100 miles between myself and that accursed place. I never went back. I couldn't. I tried to report it, of course. I told a version of the story to the local police, leaving out the impossible parts. I talked about a crumbling, unsafe structure and an elderly man in a state of delusion. They investigated, or so they said. They found the manor partially collapsed, a ruin that was too unstable to even enter. Of Alistair Blackwood or the attic or the portrait, they found no trace. Officially, an eccentric old man simply vanished when his ancestral home finally gave way. But I know the truth. I carry it with me every day. Sometimes when I'm alone in a quiet room, I can still feel that phantom chill, that sense of being watched. And on rare, sleepless nights when I look in the mirror, I can almost see it. A faint, pale translucence to my own skin, as if a part of me was successfully pulled away and never fully came back. Some houses aren't just haunted by ghosts. Some are haunted by life, stolen, hoarded, and finally, mercifully, set free. Some histories should be left unread, and some doors should never ever be opened. If you have a story like this one, a brush with the unexplained that has stayed with you, I encourage you to share it in the comments below. It helps to know you're not alone. And if you want to hear more encounters with the darkness that lurks just beyond what we can see, make sure to subscribe. You never know what secrets are waiting to be uncovered.